In this video, I'm sharing a homemade nut roll, and this is a family tradition. This is from my mother's side, which has a Slovak origin. They were Slovak, and they made nut roll. And there's other names for it. I can't remember what they're called. I'll put them in the description below. But I'm making a nut roll, and there's a few different varieties. I use the recipe that has more of a pastry dough, so it's a little thinner, a little more flaky instead of a more of a bread dough, thicker. So I'm going to be referring to this recipe, and here's a photo of what the nut roll looks like. And these will make about 15 nut rolls, and since it requires a lot of flour, I cream the butter and sugar here first, and then I'm going to move over to this bowl to knead the dough. And then we're going to grind nuts, and then we're going to set it all up and start rolling out dough, filling it in with the walnut paste, and rolling them up and baking them. So let's get started. And like I said, I'm going to be referring to my recipe. Even though I've made it every year forever, I do not have it memorized. So I'm going to start with the dough. And I always use Kerrygold butter if I can. And this calls for 1.5 pounds of butter. And this is at room temperature. And I'm using unsalted butter. I usually use unsalted for baking unless the recipe says otherwise. I've had this mixer forever, actually over 30 years. It was a wedding present, and we've been married 33 years as of yesterday. So the mixer keeps on going. I have had to replace the paddle, but that's about it. Okay, towel, something to just have. Okay, so I'm going to cream this. The recipe calls for 10.5 cups of flour. So in my mixer here, I'm just going to start with 1 cup of flour just to get some mixture, but then I'm going to mix the rest of it in here. And I always use organic flour, and the King Arthur all-purpose flour is worked out fine. You can see what the butter looks like. It's a beautiful color. Just gonna put this in. So that's 1 cup of butter. I do have those shields that go around that keep the flour in, but this is just such a messy process anyway that I don't really worry about it too much. I'm just going to clean up the whole place when I'm all done. I'll be here for a few hours today. Okay, so I've got a little bit of flour in there, and it calls for 5 eggs, which I already have separated, and a little bit of powdered sugar. You don't want it too sweet. The sweetness comes in the filling and when you roll it out. Or when I roll it out, I use a powdered sugar combination. It gives it that nice sugary coating. So just putting a little bit of sugar in. Just for a little sweetness. I'd add another cup of flour. I don't feel the need to have a bigger mixer because this is a once a year endeavor. Calls for 2 packets of rapid rise yeast, so I'm going to put that in too now so that that mixes in. It's not required, you don't have to proof it ahead of time. Okay, so I'm going to add the eggs in. teaspoons of baking powder. Three teaspoons of vanilla. I'm just going to keep adding the flour until this bowl is so full. Then I'll knead it in the larger bowl. So that was 3 cups of flour. I've got the dough out of the bowl, and now I'm going to just continue adding in the flour. I already have 4 cups in there. I've got 6 more to go, 6.5 more to go. I don't get as precise now because we're just going to keep mixing until it's the right consistency. And after doing it for so many years, I know what that is. And frankly, I don't really like getting my hands this dirty. It's annoying because then you have an itch on your face and you got dough on your hands. So I'll try to get this over with as fast as possible. I'm just doing it kind of rough at first. And then I'm going to add some milk in as needed to get that right dough consistency. The rolling out and assembling is much more enjoyable, I find. This is just tedious. It would be nice to have a machine with that big dough hook that could handle all this. Okay, so the 6, 7. I'm at the point now where it's very dry and crumbly. So now I start adding in milk to get it to bind together. It's getting sticky now, but it's starting to bind together. I still have to add more flour, about 2.5 cups. So that's 9 cups so far. It comes to about a cup of milk. It's starting to form a ball now, so I'm going to put it out on the board and hand knead it till it stays together. So I knead it until it just starts to hold together, because that's all we needed to do. I'm going to let this rest. I like to leave it out so that it's soft. You can put it in the refrigerator and use it the next day, but I like to leave it out so it's soft so I can roll. And it gets more attention, again, when I start to slice this and roll it. So it doesn't need to be, you don't want to over knead it. You want the dough and the flour to be soft. So I'm just going to wrap this, set this aside. We're going to clean up and start the nuts. Now we're going to get started with the nut filling. It calls for egg whites. I've lightly beaten. I've already beaten those, and a cup of sugar. And I always use organic sugar, and this is a raw, organic raw cane sugar, and it has a nice texture, grind. You know, it's kind of fine. So I've got the sugar. Let's start with grinding the nuts. My recipe and history with my notes says 5 pounds of nuts is perfect. So I have 5 pounds of nuts here. I try to collect them, buy them not at peak baking season, so they're not top dollar, but nuts this year have been very expensive in 2022. And this is the brand that I have this year, just because of the availability and size. I use this KitchenAid attachment grinder, and I grind them fine. My sister uses a food processor for hers, and I'm going to show you her texture at the end, because she actually, just today I received a nut roll that she sent me that she made, and she makes them every year. So it will be a good side-by-side comparison. They both taste delicious. It's kind of like a comparison with crunchy or smooth peanut butter. So I consider mine the smooth, hers is the crunchy, and they're both delicious. So let's get these going in the grinder. Doesn't take long. You'll do a quick work of this. I also use this grinder for meat and bread to make breadcrumbs. It's very useful. You can use this to push the nuts down if you need to. I just find they go on their own. And it's a beautiful, fine consistency. You just use your hands too if you need to, if you don't have a stick. Okay, let's check back after we get the 5 pounds of nuts ground. Here's how the grinding looks at the top. This comes out nicely. I wanted to show that I've got one little dog here watching me. That's the little guy. Hi, little guy. Thanks for watching. Oh, he's like, what happened? Is there a cat? That's the little guy. And here's how the nuts are looking. I'm just finishing up the last of the nuts. You can see it's quite a pile here. The old-fashioned way of doing this that we did growing up and my grandmother did, we had the hand grinder, and we would clamp it onto a board or the counter or a table, and we would do this by hand in the grinder, and you would get the same consistency. So if you don't have a KitchenAid attachment and you want a finer grind, you can look for one of those grinders. They still make them. You can find them in an antique shop or a kitchen shop, and you will get the same fine grind with that. This is much faster. And oh my gosh, we took turns doing that. So if you can get an attachment on a KitchenAid mixer, that would be the best choice. It's a choice I like. And that's it. I like to take this apart while it's on here, just to get all the rest of the fine paste out. And this is the grinding plates that are used for the fine. I just take this off, and then I'm going to clean this out. It's a couple bigger chunks, and we'll get ready to make that sweet and add the milk and the egg whites to make it a spreadable consistency. Okay, see, we have our nuts here, and it is pretty full to the top, but I use the same bowl every year, and then I just work with it. So I put the egg whites in. That's 2 egg whites. Going to be a cup of sugar. And I do taste test it along the way to make sure it's, the sweetness that I want. Add vanilla, about a teaspoon or so. I have more to add. My family would use an almond extract for flavoring, and I did that for years, and then I stopped using it. And I just like to have the walnut flavor come through. So I don't use the almond extract. I just put more vanilla in it to enhance the flavor. You don't have to measure all this. This is more to taste, because I've done this for, oh my gosh, 50 years now at least. And then I'm just going to add milk so that it makes it spreadable. And I know the texture that I'm looking for. I just have to get everything moist and combined, and then add enough milk to make it spreadable. So I use a spreader like this that has some nice bend to it. And I'm looking to get a paste consistency. I can feel it's nice and moist. You can see that I can easily spread that. That's what I'm looking for, because I'm going to spread this out on top of the dough. And I don't want it to break the dough. It has to be soft enough to spread across the dough without pulling on the dough. So I'm pleased with this. I'm just going to taste for sweetness and see if it needs more vanilla. I don't want to make it too sweet because the dough I roll in a combination of powdered and floured sugar, powdered sugar and regular sugar. So that gives it a nice sweetness on the outside. So I don't want the filling to be too sweet, and this tastes pretty perfect. So I'm going to leave it at that, and then I'm going to clean up again, and then we're going to start to roll out the dough and put in the filling. We're going to assemble the nut roll. I've got the dough here, I've got the nut paste here. This is what I roll instead of flour like you would, other dough. This is a 50-50 mix of powdered sugar and granulated sugar, and I just mix it together with this whisk so that it doesn't have any big lumps. And I use that, and we're going to roll this out, and I'll just show you how I do it. And you keep adding the sugar mixture, and that's what adds that sweetness. I use a marble rolling pin because I have it, and it kind of helps the action, and it's less work you have to do on your arms. When you roll it out, it doesn't have to be perfectly round. It never is. It can be rectangular. Whatever shape it turns into is fine. I try to just do a little challenge with myself to get it round, and it's never round. And you see you have to keep adding more of the sugar mixture. And this is why I don't make the filling too sweet, because we're adding a lot of sugar in this rolling out process. And my goal is to get it so it's about 1/8 of an inch thick. So it gives it a nice flaky texture. And I'll go through a lot of this sugar mixture and just keep flipping it and making sure that it's not sticking. And you will get weird shapes. Well, I do anyway. I've never really perfected the rolling out in a perfect circle. But that's what makes it look homemade. It is not perfect. I mean, it's perfect, but it's not perfect. Probably if a baker did this, made these every day. And at some point I do, when I get down to the thickness that I want the dough, I try to get it to stick so that it's easier to spread the filling onto it. So you can see it's not a perfectly round shape, but it really doesn't matter. I just take the nut paste and start dolloping it onto the dough. And when it's stuck to the board, it makes it easier to spread. But you can see now the consistency of what I was trying to achieve with the paste. It really is kind of just like it's a nut butter, really. And I find this part it's very relaxing. I'll have music on, and it's just a nice process. And I always go to the edges because when it's rolled, you want it, when you cut into it, you want it to be completely filled with the nut paste. And try to get it, evenly spread because I'm a little obsessive that way. It's kind of a challenge too. So all the way to the edges. And then depending on the shape, it might be a little bit oblong, but my goal is to always go the longest way and roll it up that way. And that's it. And then I do roll it in more of the sugar mixture. I fold these ends and tuck them under. Each end and tuck them under. Hopefully you can see that in the camera. And I make these foil, I call them foil boats, and I do 3 to a sheet. And that way they bake in there, and then I can wrap them up. And then I just put them in here, and I'll do one more, and then this will go in the oven at 350 for about 40 minutes. So I get these all lined up, and then I just sit here and let them bake. And that's the process. So I'll do that about 13 more times until we're done. I am done with the nut roll baking, and the mess isn't too bad. I just did another cookie dough. I'm going to clean up, but these are the nut rolls. And then what I do is I wrap them up in the foil, put them in a plastic tin, and keep them in the freezer until I'm ready to serve them or give them away. I wanted to show you the 2 nut rolls side by side. The one on the left is the one that my sister made, and she does the nut grinding with the food processor. So as I mentioned, you can see it's more like a chunky paste filling. Mine is, I use the grinder as you saw, and it's a very fine nut paste in the middle. So it's the smooth version. So here's the smooth version versus the chunky version. And it looks so pretty when you slice it. My family's always sliced it on the diagonal. I don't know why, but it makes for, I think, a larger slice than if you cut it straight. So I hope you enjoyed the Slovak nut roll recipe and tutorial, so to speak, and enjoy. I hope you give it a try. It's really not as hard as it may seem. Once you can do half of a recipe, just do a few rolls. I had a friend who did that, and she had good success. So happy baking.